The rain in Manhattan doesn't care if you run the city's underground or if you've walked the earth for 8 centuries. It soaks you just the same. Silas Montgomery, a predator veiled in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, stood outside the glass doors of Per Se, humiliated by a 20-something host with an iPad. On his 800th birthday, the undisputed king of the Northeast vampire faction was denied a table. He was a breath away from tearing the building apart, until a soft voice cut through the freezing downpour. "We're closed, but you look like you need a hot meal." That single sentence didn't just save the restaurant from a massacre. It upended the entire supernatural hierarchy of New York. To understand the sheer absurdity of the situation, you must first understand Silas Montgomery. He was not a creature of Gothic castles or dusty crypts. In the modern world, power wore hedge fund fleece and corner office suits. Silas was the shadow CEO of Vanguard Equities, a titan of Manhattan real estate, and, more privately, the ruthless sovereign of the city's vampire population. But tonight, he was just a man trying to celebrate a milestone. 800 years old. A quiet dinner at Thomas Keller's Per Se in Columbus Circle felt appropriate. His assistant had supposedly secured the most coveted corner table overlooking Central Park, paying a small fortune in Bitcoin to bypass the 6-month waiting list. Silas arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, shaking the November rain from his cashmere overcoat. The scent of truffles, seared wagyu, and the subtle, intoxicating pulse of wealthy human blood filled the pristine foyer. He approached the host stand. Behind it stood a young man named Preston, whose name tag was as immaculate as his heavily gelled hair. "Good evening," Silas said. His voice a low, magnetic hum that usually compelled humans to immediately do whatever he wished. "Montgomery, party of one. Now." Preston tapped the screen of his silver iPad. He frowned, tapped again, and then looked up with a perfectly practiced smile of condescension. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see a Montgomery in the system." "Check again," Silas commanded, pushing a fraction of his vampiric compulsion into the words. A subtle gold ring flared in the center of his dark eyes. Normally, Preston's pupils would dilate, and he would scramble to find a table, even if it meant evicting the mayor. But the host merely blinked. Silas felt the familiar, irritating buzz of vervain and wolfsbane. A modern cocktail of supernatural deterrents pumped through the restaurant's sophisticated HVAC system to keep undesirables from feeding on the billionaire clientele. Per Se was an elite human sanctuary, completely immune to his mind tricks. "I assure you, sir, there is no reservation. And even if there were, we have a strict dress code," Preston said, eyeing the rain droplets on Silas's otherwise immaculate coat. "Furthermore, we are entirely fully booked for a private event, hosted by the Rockefeller estate. I must ask you to step aside." A dangerous, primal silence fell over Silas. Deep within his chest, the beast stirred. His fangs ached, pressing against his gums. It would be so easy. A blur of motion, the snap of a neck, the screaming of the elite, the taste of Preston's arrogant, overpriced blood on his tongue. It had been decades since he had allowed himself a public slaughter. The temptation was a physical ache, but Silas was a king because of his discipline, not his temper. A massacre in Columbus Circle would bring the European Council down on his head, break the fragile truce with the Lycan syndicates, and destroy his billion-dollar empire. He looked at the iPad, then at the smug human, and inhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the podium until the mahogany groaned. "Enjoy your evening," Silas whispered, the words laced with a quiet, lethal promise. He turned and walked back out into the freezing, relentless New York storm. He didn't call his driver. He needed to walk off the sheer, vibrating rage that was turning his vision red. He walked down 9th Avenue, oblivious to the icy rain soaking through his suit, his expensive Patek Philippe watch catching the neon glare of the streetlights. For the first time in centuries, Silas Montgomery felt entirely, pathetically alone. He was a king without a kingdom tonight, shivering on a street corner, denied a simple meal on the day of his birth. 10 blocks south, Nara Hamilton was fighting a losing battle against a rusted espresso machine. The copper spoon was a relic, a narrow, dimly lit diner wedged between a modernized Chase Bank and a sterile luxury high-rise. It smelled eternally of roasted garlic, old pine wood, and impending bankruptcy. Nara, at 29, felt like she had lived 3 lifetimes. She was wiping down the laminate counters with a pine sol-soaked rag, her dark hair tied up in a messy, exhausted bun. In the back booth, her 6-year-old son, Luciano, was fast asleep, his cheek pressed against a worn Spider-Man backpack. He was covered with Nara's oversized wool cardigan. Looking at him, her chest tightened with that familiar, heavy blend of overwhelming love and suffocating anxiety. The red numbers on the Con Edison final notice sitting by the cash register seemed to mock her. $5,000, past due. She had inherited the diner from her father, along with its crippling debts and a clientele that mostly consisted of insomniacs and off-duty paramedics. She was supposed to close at 10 p.m. It was now 10:45 p.m., and the rain was coming down in sheets, rattling the large front window. Nara walked to the front door to flip the neon open sign to closed, but her hand paused on the switch. Standing on the opposite corner, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a broken street lamp, was a man. Even from across the avenue, Nara could tell he didn't belong in Hell's Kitchen. He was tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, and wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than her entire kitchen inventory. But he wasn't moving. He was just standing in the torrential downpour, looking completely defeated, his head bowed, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. Nara's sensible inner monologue, honed by years of surviving in New York, screamed at her to lock the door, pull the security grate down, and go home. But Nara had a fatal flaw. She couldn't ignore broken things. Maybe it was because she felt pretty broken herself. Before she could talk herself out of it, she unlocked the glass door, pushed it open, and leaned out into the cold night. "Hey!" she yelled over the roar of passing taxis. The man didn't move. "Hey, Wall Street!" She tried again, louder. Slowly the man turned his head. Even from a distance, the intensity of his dark eyes made Nara's breath hitch. There was something ancient and heavy in his gaze, like looking into a deep, freezing ocean. "We're closed," Nara called out, shivering in her thin apron. "But the coffee's still hot, and you look like you're going to catch pneumonia. Get in here." Silas stared at the woman in the doorway of the rundown diner. Her apron was stained with marinara, and she looked exhausted, yet she was offering him the sanctuary that the elite of the city had just denied him. He crossed the street, his movements silent and fluid despite the heavy, wet clothes. As he stepped into the Copper Spoon, the warmth of the small diner washed over him. He immediately smelled the familiar, sharp tang of old cooking grease. But beneath that, he smelled her. Nara. A scent like vanilla, old books, and the purest, sweetest underlying hum of life he had encountered in a century. His fangs gave a phantom throb, but he ruthlessly crushed the instinct down. "Sit anywhere," Nara said, gesturing vaguely to the empty red vinyl booths, deliberately avoiding the back where Luciano was sleeping. "I'm Nara. Give me your coat. I'll put it near the radiator." Silas silently slipped off his ruined cashmere overcoat and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. Nara gasped slightly. His skin was like ice. "Good Lord, you're freezing," she muttered, bustling away to drape the coat over an old iron radiator. "What on earth are you doing standing in the rain in a suit like that?" Silas paused, his deep voice filling the quiet diner. He didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. "I had a dinner reservation. It was unexpectedly cancelled." Nara snorted, pouring a mug of black coffee and sliding it onto the counter. "Let me guess. Somewhere fancy with tiny portions and a maitre d' who acts like he's doing you a favor by letting you breathe their air." Silas offered a small, rare half-smile. "Something like that. It happens to be my birthday." Nara paused, the coffee pot hovering in the air. She looked at him, really looked at him. The sharp, aristocratic jawline, the pale skin, the profound loneliness etched into his posture. "Well, hell," Nara said softly. "You can't have a ruined birthday. Not in my diner. Sit down at the counter. I'm going to make you something." "That is not necessary, Nara," Silas said, testing the shape of her name on his tongue. It felt entirely right. "I don't really eat standard food. Everyone eats," Nara said dismissively, tying her apron tighter. "Any allergies?" Sunlight, wooden stakes, and holy water, Silas thought dryly. "Garlic," he said aloud. "Strictly no garlic. An Italian joint with a customer who can't eat garlic." "Of course," she laughed, a sound that made Silas's dead heart give a strange, impossible flutter. "Sit. Let me see what I can do." For the next 20 minutes, Silas watched Nara move. To a vampire's heightened senses, watching a human cook was usually a cacophony of overwhelming smells and chaotic noises. But there was a rhythm to Nara. He listened to the steady, comforting beat of her heart, the soft hush-hush of her breathing, and the deft, practiced movements of her hands. He glanced to the back booth and noticed the sleeping child. Her son, he deduced, noting the shared facial structure and the identical, soothing scent of their bloodlines. A single mother, working late, drowning in debt. He had seen the past due notice by the register the moment he walked in. Nara finally placed a steaming plate in front of him. It wasn't human food he was used to forcing down to keep up appearances. It was a beautiful, simple ribeye steak, seared perfectly, accompanied by a rich, dark reduction sauce and a side of roasted rosemary potatoes. "No garlic," she promised, leaning against the counter. "It's a balsamic and cherry reduction. The meat was supposed to be for my own dinner tomorrow, but happy birthday." Silas looked at the meal. He hadn't felt an appetite for human food in centuries. It usually tasted like ash, but the sheer kindness radiating from this tired, beautiful woman compelled him. He picked up the knife and fork. He cut a piece and placed it in his mouth. He closed his eyes. The iron of the rare meat, the sweetness of the cherry, the tang of the vinegar. It didn't taste like ash. It tasted like warmth. "This is extraordinary," Silas said honestly, opening his eyes to meet hers. "Thank you." A faint blush crept up Nara's neck. "It's just steak, but I'm glad you like it." She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat on a stool across from him. "So, mister, ruined birthday, I gave you my name. What's yours?" "Silas," he replied. "Silas Montgomery." Nara tilted her head. "Sounds like a name from an old Victorian novel. I like it." "What do you do, Silas?" "I acquire things," Silas said carefully. "Real estate, companies, information." "A corporate shark," Nara teased, resting her chin in her hand. "Well, you don't look very scary right now, eating my leftover ribeye." They talked. Silas, who usually communicated in threats, contracts, and centuries-old political maneuvers, found himself utterly captivated by Nara's stories of the neighborhood, her sarcastic wit, and her fierce, protective love for her sleeping son, Luciano. He found himself telling her small, filtered truths about himself, his love for classical architecture, his disdain for modern technology, the burden of managing a massive organization. For an hour, Silas wasn't a vampire king. He was just a man, enjoying his birthday in a warm room with a beautiful woman. Then, the bell above the door violently chimed. The heavy, aggressive sound of heavy boots stomping onto the linoleum shattered the peace. Silas didn't need to turn around. His senses had already picked them up 2 blocks away. The aggressive spike of adrenaline, the smell of cheap tobacco, gun oil, and bad intentions. 2 men walked in. The first was a massive, thick-necked brute wearing a leather jacket soaked from the rain. The second was shorter, wiry, with a nasty scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Local enforcers. Nara's posture instantly went rigid. The playful warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a pale, terrified mask. She immediately glanced towards the back booth, silently praying Luciano wouldn't wake up. "Well, well," the wiry man said, shaking his umbrella out onto the clean floor. "Look who's working late. Nara, sweetheart. You didn't return my boss's calls. I told you, Mick, Nara said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. I don't have the payment this week. The espresso machine broke, and my supplier raised prices. I just need until Friday. The large man stepped forward, slamming a heavy hand onto the counter, making the coffee cups rattle. Friday ain't good enough, Nara, Mr. Valenti said tonight. We provide protection. You pay for it. If you can't pay. He picked up a ceramic sugar bowl and casually let it drop to the floor. It shattered into dozens of pieces. Things might start getting broken around here. Nara flinched. Please don't do this here. My son is sleeping. Mick smiled, a cruel, ugly thing. He started walking towards the back booth. Little Luciano, maybe we should wake him up. Tell him his mum's a deadbeat. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. Mick stopped, blinking in confusion. Silas was no longer sitting on his stool. He hadn't walked. He had simply arrived between Mick and the back booth, moving faster than the human eye could process. Silas's hand was clamped around Mick's throat, lifting the wiry man 3 inches off the ground. The lady, Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a terrifying, unnatural echo that made the air in the diner drop 10 degrees, asked you not to wake her son. The larger man yelled, reaching into his jacket for a heavy, matte black pistol. Before the weapon could clear the holster, Silas threw Mick backward with casual, terrifying force. Mick crashed through a wooden table, splintering it into kindling, and lay motionless. Without breaking a sweat, Silas turned to the large man. The brute froze, staring at the monster, masquerading as a Wall Street executive. Silas's eyes had changed. The dark irises were now bleeding into a vivid, glowing amber. A low, vibrating growl rumbled in Silas's chest, a sound that belonged to an apex predator in the wild, not a man in a diner. Who? What are you? The brute stammered, backing away, his hand trembling on his gun. I am the man trying to enjoy his birthday dinner, Silas whispered, stepping closer. The compulsion hit the enforcer like a physical blow. The man's eyes glazed over instantly. You are going to take your friend. You are going to leave this establishment. You will tell Mr. Valenti that the copper spoon is now under the personal protection of Silas Montgomery. If any of you ever look at this diner again, I will personally pull your spines through your throats. Do you understand? Yes, the man droned in a monotone voice. Pick him up and get out. The large man clumsily hoisted his unconscious partner over his shoulder and stumbled out into the rain, fleeing into the night as if the devil himself were behind them. And in a way he was. Silence descended back onto the diner, save for the hum of the old refrigerator. Silas slowly turned around. The amber glow faded from his eyes, returning to their normal dark hue. He looked at Nara. She was backed up against the cash register, her eyes wide with shock, staring at him. She had seen the speed. She had seen his eyes. She knew. Silas's chest tightened with a sudden, sharp panic he hadn't felt in centuries. He had broken the cardinal rule of his kind. He had exposed himself to a human. He would have to compel her, wipe her memory of the last 10 minutes, erase the connection they had just built. The thought of taking the warmth from her eyes and replacing it with blank compliance made him feel physically ill. He took a slow step toward her. Nara held up a trembling hand, stopping him. She looked at the shattered sugar bowl, the broken table, and then up at the impossibly handsome, terrifying man standing in her diner. She took a deep, shuddering breath. So, Nara said, her voice shaking, but her eyes locked fiercely onto his. I'm guessing you're not going to need a to-go box for that steak, are you? Silas froze. He had lived through the Black Plague, the burning of London, and the brutal clandestine wars of the European vampire factions. But the sight of Nara Hamilton clutching a kitchen towel and asking about a to-go box left him entirely speechless. He looked at her pulse point, visibly fluttering against the delicate skin of her throat. Her heart was hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs, a hummingbird trapped in a glass jar. She was terrified. Of course she was. But she hadn't screamed. She hadn't run towards the back booth to shield her son from the monster in the room. She stood her ground, using a desperate, sarcastic joke as a shield. "I won't hurt you," Silas said, his voice dropping to a raw, gravelly whisper. He took a deliberate step back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The pale, long fingers that had just crushed a man's windpipe now looked stark and empty under the flickering fluorescent lights. "Nara, I swear it on my existence. You and your son are safe." Nara's knees finally betrayed her. She slumped against the stainless steel counter, letting out a breath that sounded half like a sob and half like a laugh. "Safe, right. You just threw a 200-pound mob enforcer through a solid oak table like he was a frisbee. Your eyes literally glowed in the dark, and you expect me to just— What? Pour you another cup of coffee?" "I expect you to let me clean up the mess," Silas replied softly. He moved with that unnatural liquid grace again, though slower this time, telegraphing his movements. He walked over to the shattered remnants of the table and the broken ceramic of the sugar bowl. With terrifying efficiency, he began to gather the heavy, splintered wood, stacking it neatly near the trash bins. Nara watched him, her mind reeling. "What are you?" she asked, the question hanging heavy in the air, thick with the smell of spilled coffee and rain. "And don't tell me you're a corporate shark, unless Wall Street is literally sucking the blood out of people now." Silas paused, a jagged piece of oak in his hand. He looked at her over his shoulder. The candid truth was a luxury he rarely afforded himself, but the lie felt like poison on his tongue. "You already know the answer to that, Nara. The myths are mostly wrong, but the core of it— the blood, the immortality, the strength— that part is true." Nara closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. "I have a past due Con Edison bill for $5,000. The Department of Sanitation fined me yesterday because a homeless guy went through my dumpster. I owe a loan shark named Valenti 20 grand at an extortionate interest rate, and my espresso machine just died. And now— vampires are real." She opened her eyes and let out a breathless, borderline hysterical chuckle. "You know what? Fine. Put it on the tab. It's barely in the top 5 of my problems right now." Silas felt a strange, profound ache in his chest. A phantom heartbeat. In 800 years he had been feared, worshipped, hunted, and obeyed. He had never been managed. He had never been treated as just another Tuesday night headache. He dropped the wood and walked towards the cash register, his bespoke Oxford shoes crunching slightly on the residual glass. He looked at the red-stamped past due notices pinned to the corkboard. He noted the rusted, sputtering shell of the diner's espresso machine. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, black, titanium American Express card. He laid it flat on the laminate counter. "What is that?" Nara asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "A solution," Silas said, leaning against the counter, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made the air suddenly feel very thin. "Tomorrow morning, an associate of mine will arrive. He will pay off the entirety of your debt to Valenti in cash. He will contact the utility companies. By noon, a team from Vanguard Equities will be here to replace that hazard you call an espresso machine with a brand new La Marzocco Linnea PB. And tomorrow afternoon my legal team will finalize the purchase of this building from your current landlord." Nara stared at him, the color draining from her face for an entirely different reason. Pride, fierce and unyielding, flared in her chest. "No, absolutely not. I don't take charity, and I certainly don't take it from whatever you are. I'm not a stray dog you can just adopt because you felt bad on your birthday." "It is not charity, Nara," Silas countered, his voice smooth and authoritative, the boardroom CEO seamlessly replacing the apex predator. "It is an acquisition. Vanguard Equities has been attempting to purchase this block for 2 years to develop a luxury high-rise. Your landlord has been holding out. I am buying the building, but I am offering you a lifetime rent-free lease on the ground floor. You keep the copper spoon. You run it exactly as you see fit." "Why?" Nara demanded, stepping closer, her chin jutting out defiantly. Why would a billionaire vampire care about a failing diner in Hell's Kitchen? Silas looked away for a fraction of a second, his gaze drifting to the back booth where Luciano was shifting in his sleep. Because when I stood in the rain, feeling like a ghost, you opened the door, he thought. Because your food didn't taste like ash. Because your scent makes the monster in my blood sit down and beg. Because I require a sanctuary, Silas lied, though it was a half-truth. There are rules in my world. Territories. Conflicts. I need a place in this city where I am not the king of the faction, but merely a patron. I need a place that is immune to the politics of my kind. Consider this diner neutral ground. In exchange for your culinary services and your absolute discretion, Vanguard Equities will ensure that neither the mortal mob nor the supernatural elite ever lay a finger on you or your son. Nara looked from the black card on the counter to Silas's unreadable face. She thought about Valenti's goons returning tomorrow. She thought about Luciano, sleeping in a booth because she couldn't afford a babysitter. She was drowning, and this terrifying, beautiful, impossible man was offering her a boat. A La Marzocco Linnea PB, she asked, her voice quiet. The 3-group model? A slow, devastatingly handsome smirk played on Silas's lips, custom matte black, with built-in scales. Nara exhaled a long, shaky breath. Fine, but I'm writing the lease agreement, and I want it in writing that you don't eat my customers. Agreed, Silas said, extending his cold, pale hand across the counter. Nara hesitated for only a second before she reached out and gripped his hand. His skin was like polished marble, freezing and unyielding, but as her warm fingers wrapped around his, Silas felt a jolt of electricity shoot straight up his arm, settling deep in his stagnant heart. The deal was struck, and Silas Montgomery, the undisputed king of New York, knew with terrifying certainty that he was no longer the one in control. 72 hours later, the copper spoon was unrecognizable. True to his word, Silas's world moved with terrifying speed and unlimited capital. Nara had arrived at 6 a.m. on Thursday to find 3 unmarked white vans parked outside. By 6:15 a.m., a team of silent, hyper-efficient contractors had ripped out the rusted kitchen appliances. By noon, a pristine, state-of-the-art commercial kitchen was installed, gleaming with sub-zero refrigeration units and the promised matte black La Marzocco espresso machine. The broken tables were replaced with rich mahogany, the vinyl booths reupholstered in deep, blood-red leather. It was still her diner, but it had been elevated to a masterpiece. Most shocking of all was the man sitting at the corner booth, typing on a sleek laptop. Silas. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, the jacket draped over the seat. The morning sun was streaming through the front windows, bathing him in bright, golden light. Nara, carrying a tray of freshly baked croissants, stopped dead in her tracks. You're in the sun. Silas looked up, closing his laptop. He gestured to a heavy silver ring on his right index finger. It was set with a flawless, square-cut lapis lazuli stone that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. Daylight ring, he explained casually, enchanted by a coven in Salem back in the late 17th century. An expensive trinket, but it allows me to conduct business during banking hours. Before Nara could ask how one goes about buying enchanted jewelry, a small tornado tore out from the back room. Luciano, wide awake and buzzing with the energy of a 6-year-old who had just discovered the diner's new stash of premium hot chocolate, skidded to a halt in front of Silas's booth. Luciano stared at Silas. Silas, who commanded armies of immortals and ruthlessly dismantled Fortune 500 companies, stiffened slightly, completely unsure of how to interact with a human child. Mum said you threw a bad guy through a table, Luciano announced loudly, his wide brown eyes, so much like Nara's, fixed on Silas. Nara gasped, nearly dropping the croissants. Luciano, I said he pushed a bad guy, and it was a wrestling move. Luciano ignored his mother. Are you a superhero? Like the Avengers? Do you have powers? Silas looked at the boy. He could hear the rapid, healthy thrum of the child's heart, smell the lingering scent of milk and sleep. A strange, protective instinct flared in his chest, hot and sudden. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "I am not a superhero, Luciano," Silas said, his deep voice serious and respectful. "But I do have certain abilities. And my primary job right now is to make sure that no bad guys ever bother you or your mother again. Does that sound acceptable to you?" Luciano scrutinized him for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, but if you break another table, Mum's gonna make you pay for it out of your allowance." Silas let out a sudden, genuine bark of laughter, a sound so rich and resonant it made Nara's heart skip a beat. "I will keep that in mind, Luciano. Thank you." As Luciano darted away to inspect the new pastry display, Nara walked over to Silas's booth, setting a fresh cup of coffee down. "You're good with him," she said softly. "I am merely establishing the terms of our alliance," Silas replied, though his eyes lingered on the boy with uncharacteristic warmth. "Nara, there is a matter we need to discuss. Valenti." Nara's posture tightened. "Your guy, Sebastian, right? He came by yesterday. He said the debt was cleared. He showed me the paperwork." "The financial debt is cleared," Silas corrected, his tone darkening. "But in my world, there is always a secondary cost. The men I incapacitated. I compelled them to forget my face, to remember only that a powerful benefactor had taken over the diner. But Valenti is not merely a street-level loan shark. He is a proxy." "A proxy for what?" Nara asked, the familiar dread creeping back into her stomach. "For Dante Mercer," Silas said, spitting the name out as if it were a curse. Nara frowned. "Mercer, the CEO of Apex Logistics? I read an article about him in Forbes. He practically owns the shipping ports in Brooklyn." "Apex Logistics is a front," Silas explained, his eyes scanning the busy street outside the diner's reinforced glass windows. "Mercer is the alpha of the New York Lycan Syndicate. Werewolves, to use the crude human term. The vampires control the real estate, the politics, the high-end finance. The Lycans control the docks, the unions, the physical movement of illicit goods. Valenti was funneling his extortion money up to Mercer's pack." Nara gripped the edge of the table. "So, by paying off my debt and beating up his guys, you just picked a fight with a werewolf mafia?" "I did not pick a fight," Silas said coldly. "I established a boundary. Mercer and I have a fragile truce. He stays in Brooklyn and Queens, I keep Manhattan. But he is cunning. He will notice that Vanguard Equities, my personal holding company, just bought a worthless, debt-ridden diner in Hell's Kitchen at 5 times the market value. He will want to know why I suddenly care about this specific piece of human real estate." The bell above the diner door chimed. The air in the room instantly changed. It didn't grow cold like it did when Silas was angry. Instead, it grew thick, suffocating, and heavy with the scent of wet earth, copper, and raw, predatory aggression. A man walked in. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a GQ model who had spent the weekend chopping wood in the wilderness. He was tall, incredibly muscular, wearing a tailored navy suit over a crisp white shirt with no tie. His hair was sandy blonde, his eyes a pale, piercing green. He moved with a lazy, rolling swagger that commanded immediate attention. Silas didn't move an inch, but Nara heard the wood of the mahogany table groan under his sudden, vice-like grip. "Stay behind the counter, Nara," Silas murmured, barely moving his lips. The man walked straight to the counter, ignoring the empty booths. He smiled at Nara, displaying teeth that seemed just a fraction too sharp. "Morning, sweetheart. Smells amazing in here. I'll take a black coffee, large. To go." Nara's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to turn toward the new La Marzocco machine. She went through the motions, grinding the beans, tamping the espresso. The man leaned against the counter, his pale green eyes slowly tracking the diner until they landed on Silas in the corner booth. "Silas Montgomery," the man drawled, his voice a rich, rumbling baritone. "Imagine my surprise when my accountants told me Vanguard Equities just bought out Johnny Valenti's little side hustle. You stepping into the micro-loan business now, Silas? Or did you just develop a sudden craving for diner food? Dante, Silas said, not rising from his seat, you are out of your territory. Manhattan is my jurisdiction. Dante Mercer chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on Nara's arms stand up. He accepted the coffee from Nara, dropping a crisp $100 bill into the tip jar. He deliberately let his fingers brush against the edge of a crayon drawing Luciano had left on the counter. Just taking a morning stroll, Silas. Seeing the sights, Dante said, his eyes flicking from the child's drawing back to the Vampire King. A dark, knowing amusement flashed in the lichen's eyes. He had smelled it. He smelled the lack of fear in the woman, the scent of Silas's lingering protection on the diner, the undeniable, intoxicating scent of a human who meant something to a monster who wasn't supposed to care about anything. You have a lovely establishment here, Nara, Dante said, reading her name tag. He took a sip of the scalding coffee without flinching. I'll be sure to come back. Maybe bring the pack. We love a good steak. Dante turned and walked out, the bell chiming a cheerful goodbye behind him. The silence he left behind was deafening. Silas stood up slowly, the sunlight from the window doing nothing to warm the absolute, murderous ice in his eyes. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. By trying to protect Nara, he had inadvertently painted a massive target on her back. The Alpha of the Lichen Syndicate had just realized the undisputed King of New York had a glaring, mortal weakness, and Dante Mercer was going to exploit it. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind Dante Mercer, the temperature in the copper spoon plummeted. Silas Montgomery did not yell. He did not throw anything. The terrifying reality of his rage was absolute, suffocating silence. He pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone from his tailored jacket, dialed a single digit, and pressed it to his ear. "Sebastian," Silas commanded, his voice devoid of any human inflection. "Initiate Protocol Lazarus. I need a Tier 1 extraction team at the diner in exactly 4 minutes. Bring the armored Maybach, and authorize lethal force for any Lichen signature within a 5-block radius." Nara dropped her dish towel. "Lethal force? Extraction?" "Silas, my son is eating a chocolate croissant in the back booth. We are not entering a war zone." Silas pocketed the phone and closed the distance between them in a fraction of a second. He gripped her shoulders, his touch freezing through the thin cotton of her uniform, his amber eyes burning into hers. "Nara, you do not understand the politics of my kind. Dante did not come here for a cup of coffee. He came to verify a rumor. He came to see if the undisputed king of the New York faction had found a human weakness, and you, standing here, smelling like vanilla and defiance, you are the greatest weakness I have had in 8 centuries. Nara's breath hitched. The raw, desperate confession hung between them, heavy and dangerous. "I am not a weakness," she whispered fiercely. "To them, you are leverage," Silas corrected, his thumb brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, a rare gesture of tenderness amidst the impending violence. "Dante will not attack me directly. He will take you. He will take Luciano. He will use you to force me to surrender Manhattan's shipping ports to his syndicate. I will not allow it. You are coming with me to 432 Park Avenue, now." Before Nara could argue, the roar of a V12 engine echoed down the avenue. A matte black Mercedes Maybach S 680 Pullman, heavily reinforced with ballistic plating, slammed to a halt at the curb. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out, their eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. Nara rushed to the back booth, scooping up a bewildered Luciano, who was still clutching a half-eaten pastry. "Come on, baby. We're going on a field trip with Silas." They hurried into the pouring rain and practically fell into the cavernous, leather-lined back seat of the Maybach. Silas slid in beside them, slamming the heavy armored door just as a massive, unnatural howl ripped through the concrete canyons of Hell's Kitchen. It was a sound that didn't belong in a city, a primal, blood-curdling roar that made the reinforced glass of the car vibrate. "Drive," Silas ordered. The Maybach surged forward, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. As they tore down 9th Avenue, cutting towards the FDR Drive, Nara looked out the rear window. Sprinting across the rooftops, effortlessly keeping pace with a car going 80 miles an hour, were three massive wolf-like figures. They were not the wolves of nature documentaries. They were monstrous, shifting abominations of muscle and dark fur, their eyes glowing with a sickly, toxic yellow light. "They're following us," Nara choked out, pulling Luciano tightly against her chest to shield his eyes. "They are testing our defenses," Silas said calmly, though his jaw was clenched so tight the muscle fluttered. He tapped a button on the center console. "Sebastian, deploy the countermeasures on the FDR." As the Maybach merged onto the highway, whipping past civilian sedans, the lead Lycan leaped from a highway overpass, intending to crash directly onto the roof of their vehicle. But before the beast could land, a sleek, black Ducati motorcycle roared out from the blind spot. The rider, a vampire from Silas's elite guard, swung a heavy, silver-plated chain in a brutal arc. The silver struck the Lycan mid-air, causing a violent sizzle of burning flesh. The werewolf howled in agony, crashing into the concrete barrier and tumbling out of sight. Nara squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a waitress, a single mum drowning in debt, and now she was in the middle of a high-speed supernatural gang war on the East River. Within 10 minutes, they arrived at the underground bunker garage of 432 Park Avenue. Silas escorted them into a private elevator that shot up 96 floors in stomach-churning silence. The doors opened to Silas's sanctuary, a sprawling $60 million penthouse wrapped in floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, offering a 360-degree view of the Manhattan skyline. It was decorated in minimalist, cold luxury, white marble, black leather, and priceless Renaissance artwork. It was beautiful, but it felt like a tomb. "You are safe here," Silas said, watching Nara take in the sheer scale of the wealth. "The building's HVAC is laced with vaporized wolfsbane. The glass can withstand anti-tank rounds. My guard is stationed on the roof and in the lobby." Nara set Luciano down, who immediately ran to the massive windows to press his hands against the glass, mesmerized by the toy-like city below. She turned to the Vampire King, her initial shock fading, replaced by a deep, simmering anger. "I can't live in a glass box, Silas," Nara said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I have a diner to run. I have a life. I am not a pet you can lock away in a tower because you picked a fight with a werewolf mafia." "It is temporary," Silas insisted, running a hand through his dark hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Until I can neutralize Dante Mercer. And how do you plan to do that? More high-speed chases? Throwing him through a table?" Nara crossed her arms. "You said you guys are businessmen now. You wear Tom Ford suits. You trade stocks. So why are you fighting like feral animals in an alleyway?" Silas paused, taken aback by her audacity. The supernatural world operates on a balance of terror and blood. Dante does not respect contracts. He respects dominance. "Everyone respects leverage," Nara countered, her mind racing. An idea, wild and incredibly dangerous, began to form. When Sebastian had visited the diner to clear the debt, he had left a thick manila folder of financial disclosures. The transfer of Valenti's assets to Vanguard Equities. Nara, who had done the bookkeeping for her father's diner for a decade, had spent her sleepless night reading them. "Silas," Nara said, her eyes narrowing, "when Vanguard bought out Valenti's debt, did you acquire his digital ledgers?" "Yes, a standard acquisition protocol," Silas said, frowning. "Why?" "Because," Nara said, a sharp, predatory smile spreading across her face that made Silas's dead heart flutter. "I read them. Valenti wasn't just kicking up protection money to Apex Logistics. He was acting as a wash account. Apex Logistics is using local businesses to launder cash before moving it into offshore Cayman accounts. It's sloppy, it's arrogant, and it is completely illegal under human law." Silas stared at her, the implications slowly dawning on his ancient, brilliant mind. "You are suggesting—" "I am suggesting," Nara interrupted, "that we stop playing by werewolf rules. We play by human rules. I want a meeting with Dante Mercer. The Whisper Lounge, located on the top floor of a discreet commercial high-rise in the financial district, was considered neutral ground. It was an establishment completely devoid of supernatural deterrents. No vervain, no wolfsbane, no silver. Managed by a Swiss human syndicate that catered exclusively to the monsters of New York. At midnight, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Silas Montgomery walked in, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying power, but it was the woman walking beside him that caused the room to fall into a dead, stunned silence. Nara Hamilton was dressed in a sharp, tailored black blazer she had borrowed from one of Silas's associates, her dark hair pulled back into a severe twist. She looked small next to the imposing Vampire King, but she walked with her head held high, clutching a sleek silver briefcase. Waiting at the grand, circular poker table in the center of the room was Dante Mercer. He was flanked by 4 massive, snarling Lycan enforcers. Dante's green eyes locked onto Nara, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Silas," Dante laughed, leaning back in his velvet chair. "I have to admit, I'm shocked. You brought the human to a summit. Did you bring her as a peace offering, or just as a snack for my boys?" Silas didn't take the bait. He pulled out a chair for Nara, waited for her to sit, and then stood rigidly behind her, a silent, lethal guardian. "I brought her," Silas said softly, "because she is the one negotiating your surrender." Dante let out a booming laugh, slamming his hand on the table. "My surrender? I have 300 wolves ready to tear Hell's Kitchen apart. I will burn your precious diner to the ground, Silas, and then I will take the ports. What is a waitress going to do to stop me?" Nara calmly clicked the latches of the silver briefcase. She didn't look at the snarling wolves. She looked directly into the Alpha's eyes. She pulled out a thick stack of printed documents and slid them across the green felt table. "Dante Mercer," Nara said, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the quiet room. "CEO of Apex Logistics. In the last fiscal year, you moved roughly $40 million of undocumented cash through dummy corporations in the tri-state area." Dante's smirk faltered slightly. "I have lawyers, sweetheart. The best in the city." "I'm sure you do," Nara replied smoothly. "But your local enforcer, Johnny Valenti, kept a shadow ledger on a cloud server. He meticulously documented every single wire transfer, every kickback, and every fraudulent invoice connecting your Brooklyn shipping ports to his loan sharking operation. My guess? He was keeping it as an insurance policy, in case you ever decided to kill him." She tapped the stack of papers. "This is a forensic accounting nightmare. It clearly violates the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO." Dante bared his teeth, his eyes flashing yellow. "If you think I'm afraid of human police, you are stupider than you look. I can rip a SWAT team to pieces in 3 minutes." "I don't doubt it," Nara said, leaning forward. "But you can't rip a server to pieces when it's located in 5 different jurisdictions. And you aren't dealing with the police, Dante. You're dealing with the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission." She pulled out a small, encrypted flash drive and held it up. "If anything happens to me, my son, my diner, or Silas, this drive automatically forwards to the director of the SEC, the head of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal." "The humans might not know you're a werewolf, Dante, but they know how to freeze assets. They will seize your ports. They will freeze your bank accounts. They will audit every single business you own. You won't be an alpha. You'll be a broke, homeless fugitive running from federal indictments." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Silas, who had known her plan, felt a profound shockwave of awe wash over him. In 800 years, he had seen empires fall to swords, fire, and political betrayals. He had never seen a supernatural warlord brought to his knees by the threat of a tax audit. Dante Mercer stared at the waitress, genuine horror dawning in his eyes. Without his wealth, he couldn't pay his pack. Without the ports, he had no power. The Lycan syndicate would tear him apart from the inside. She had completely bypassed his supernatural strength and struck directly at his modern infrastructure. "You," Dante growled, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and begrudging respect. "You are a very dangerous woman, Nara Hamilton." "I'm a single mother with a past-due electric bill," Nara corrected coldly. "I don't have time for your turf wars." "So here are my terms." She slid a single piece of heavy parchment across the table, drafted by Silas's supernatural legal team. "You will sign this binding treaty. You will permanently cede the Hell's Kitchen territory to Vanguard Equities. You will never approach the Copper Spoon, my son, or myself, ever again. In exchange, the drive stays in the vault." Dante looked at the contract. He looked at Silas, who was staring at Nara with an expression of such intense, terrifying devotion that it made the Lycan shudder. Dante realized he had severely underestimated the situation. Silas hadn't just found a human pet, he had found a queen. With a heavy, defeated sigh, Dante snatched a gold pen from his pocket and aggressively signed the parchment. He stood up, signaling his wolves to stand to. "Keep your diner, Nara. But remember, the supernatural world has a long memory. So does the IRS," Nara shot back seamlessly. As the Lycans exited the lounge, leaving them completely alone, Nara finally let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands were trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to completely break down. Suddenly, she felt Silas's cold, strong arms wrap around her. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself in her scent. "I have commanded legions," Silas whispered, his voice vibrating against her collarbone, thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in centuries. "I have negotiated with kings and emperors, but I have never, in my entire existence, witnessed anything as magnificent as what you just did." Nara opened her eyes and looked up at him. The amber glow in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, soulful darkness. "I told you," she smiled weakly. "Everyone respects leverage." "Nara," Silas said, gently taking her face in his hands. "You asked me why I cared about a failing diner in Hell's Kitchen. The truth is, I didn't. I cared about the woman who saw a monster standing in the freezing rain and offered him a hot meal. You saved me that night. Not from hunger, but from the void." He leaned down, and when his lips met hers, it wasn't a clash of supernatural forces. It was a promise. It was cold against warmth, immortality meeting the fragile, fierce beauty of a human life. Nara kissed him back, entirely unafraid of the predator, embracing the man who had bought her an espresso machine and promised to protect her child. 5 years later, the Copper Spoon is the most exclusive, impossible-to-book restaurant in Manhattan, boasting a 2-year waiting list and a Michelin star. Nara Hamilton runs the kitchen with an iron fist, utilizing the finest ingredients imported by Vanguard Equities. In the back booth, a 12-year-old Luciano does his homework, occasionally helped by heavily tattooed, oddly pale men in bespoke suits who treat him like a prince. And every night at exactly 8 o'clock, Silas Montgomery, the undisputed king of the New York faction, walks through the front doors. He never needs a reservation. He sits at the corner table, orders the cherry reduction ribeye with 0 garlic, and waits for the beautiful, brilliant woman who didn't just give him a table on his birthday. She gave him a kingdom worth living for.